I love when people are like, well, you don't see a cult of Joe Biden. Now, I'm willing to admit there are certain people who Donald Trump can do no wrong. And that's fine. That is the way that it is. But to suggest that like Joe Biden is somehow better because there's no cult of Joe Biden. There's no cult of Joe Biden because nobody likes him. Everybody understands that he sucks. Like nobody wants to put a Joe Biden, Kamala Harris yard sign in their yard because that would be embarrassing because everybody knows that Joe Biden is like half dead. He's like 3 feet underground already. He's making his descent into the 6 feet underground. Like, of course, there's no like cult of Joe Biden. Nobody likes the guy. All right. Including, by the way, Bob Costas, who just said it himself. And here's how horrible old Bobby thinks that Trump is because he went on to admit Grandpa Joe can't even string 2 sentences together, but, orange man still bad or something. Watch.
Biden is incapable of uttering even 2 consecutive sentences
Correct.
of the 5 perfect paragraphs that Newsom just put together. Mm-hmm. And I think Nate Silver, you quoted earlier, saying that he's got to get out there and do 4 interviews with unfriendly or at least down the middle, not softball interviews. But the problem with that is his own staff knows that he has to be bubble wrapped, that he can't do a Super Bowl interview. It's sad to say. Biden is obviously, on balance, a decent man. He's served his country.
Oh, he gets to be a decent man.
No matter what, sane people will vote for him over Trump. But it's a hell of a risk to send this guy out there. Trump is a monster. You shouldn't send this guy out there at this point in his life to try and slay the dragon.
Oh, a monster. Donald Trump is a monster. He's the most disgraceful president ever. And somehow he keeps getting more and more disgraceful. He's a monster. Like, I just cannot with these people. The hyperbole and the gaslighting is honestly just exhausting. Like, it couldn't possibly be, maybe, that Donald Trump was a much better president than you people want to give him credit for. And by the way, as a reminder, this is coming from someone who criticizes Donald Trump where I believe he deserves criticism. All right. I feel like I have to give this as like a preface every single time. His spending was out of control. It was wrong. His COVID response was awful. Operation Warp Speed was a disaster. I was, by the way, saying those things at the time. So not what you would call a sycophant or a cult member, in my opinion. I call balls and strikes, and I try to be as objective as possible. But to ignore the state of the country during Trump's presidency, before the unprecedented event that was COVID, is, I would say, disingenuous or stupid or both. So let's go back to this man who is emotionally and mentally and intellectually and ethically unqualified to be president. Was he unqualified to be president when we had record low unemployment, minorities and women included? Was that an unqualification, disqualification? It reached the lowest levels in like half a century. For the first time on record before COVID, back in December 2019, under Donald Trump, there were more job openings than unemployed Americans. Is that unqualified? Was he unqualified when our economy was booming before China unleashed a bioweapon on all of us that nobody could have prepared for? 2.4 Americans lifted out of poverty. More than 7 million Americans were able to be lifted off of food stamps. Does that sound like unqualified to you? Is that an unqualified resume? How about when he negotiated more peace in the Middle East than we had ever seen previous? Or when he moved our embassy to Jerusalem, like he said he was going to do, and nobody else had done. Everyone else talked about doing it. He actually did it. Or how about when he killed Baghdadi, the ISIS leader and the world's most wanted terrorist at the time? Took him out. Is that unqualified? Tax cuts. Manufacturing jobs being moved back to America, regulatory reform that resulted in billions of more dollars in American pockets. What about his tough stance on the border? The agreements he made with Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. The Remain in Mexico policy, which, by the way, that same policy, the Remain in Mexico policy, Trump's policy that Joe Biden undid on day one. Because it was Orange man bad, Donald Trump bad. Undo this policy because Orange man bad. That was working, which now Joe Biden, of course, has been forced to admit quietly behind the scenes. Violent crime fell under Donald Trump. So I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to to be objective, and I'm willing to call him out on his flaws. But I would just say, for all of his flaws, his record was significant. I mean, there are certain things, points of his presidency that were indisputably good for the country. The mean tweets, though. Oh, he said mean things on the internet. He sometimes makes insults at people that I like, and so you're a toxic cult member for saying, hey, those are pretty great things Donald Trump did. He actually achieved a lot of success before COVID hit. Oh, and by the way, as an added bonus, he apparently didn't, I guess he made Russia nervous enough that they didn't bother invading Ukraine, nor did Iran start testing the waters with Israel through their proxy Hamas. Like, literally none of those things happened under Donald Trump's leadership, yet it is totally out of the question for these people to consider that perhaps the average American just really wants, at the end of the day, to live a good, stable life with their family without government interference. And maybe they're just sick to death of the left's bullshit. Like, that's not even a consideration for them? That doesn't even enter their radar? Like, maybe these things are important to Americans: a strong economy, less government interference, less regulation. I want to be able to start a company without the government giving me 10 million things of a list of things that I can't do. Maybe that's what's important to the average American, and not your political games that you guys play on TV. And, for all that Bob Costas and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and MSNBC and CNN want to go on the air and sit there as a talking head and talk about, if you think Donald Trump is better than Biden, you're in a cult. Let's go ahead and take a look over on their side, where they have, seemingly pledged allegiance to the LGBTQIA plus apostrophe exclamation point exponent flag. I'm trying to think if I covered all the bases there. I'm sure that there are some that I forgot, and I apologize. I didn't mean to not be inclusive. I apologize if I missed your gender. But that's what they pledge allegiance to these days. That's where they show their loyalty to the cause by, volunteering to chop their young daughter's healthy breasts off because she likes to climb trees. You have people like Taylor Lorenz that we just played yesterday. Taylor Lorenz, in the year 2024, wearing an N95 mask in broad daylight. But that's not a cult, okay? That is not a cult. Just because there's not a cult of Biden doesn't mean that the left is not operating as a cult. It's not a cult that, you can't just say, I want American money, I want taxpayer money not to be funneled to Ukraine for a war that I didn't ask for. You got to put the Ukraine flag in your bio and the LGBTQIA plus apostrophe S multiply, divide, subtract, addition flag in your bio. You got to have these flags in your bio. You got to wear the N95 mask in the year 2024. But don't worry, we're not a cult. And I just keep thinking back to an experience that I had over the weekend. I spent a good part of my Saturday volunteering out at the polls, because here in Texas, we are in the middle of early voting, which, by the way, go vote in the primary. The primary process is important. We have to get all of these rhinos out of office. And I was out there volunteering mostly because I really want my candidate for our House rep seat to win. And that is Mitch Little. For those of you who are in HD 65 in Texas, go vote for Mitch Little, all right, in the primary. That is this week through Friday. And then on Tuesday is the last day. That is voting day. But I volunteered for an organization called Red Wave Texas that has a voter guide. You can look it up, by the way. You should, if you're voting in Texas. They have a voter guide to show people voting in the Republican primary who the most conservative candidates are, so that we can get all these, establishment people out of office. And it's just really, the human psyche is very interesting to me. And the way that Democrats and Republicans seem to be just built differently is very interesting to me. Maybe it is, I minored in forensic psychology. So maybe it's like the psychology part of my studies that I'm fascinated by this. But I like to play this internal game as a poll greeter. I'm out there, where I guess whether the person who is approaching the polling place, who I am about to go try to strike up a conversation with, is a Democrat or a Republican. And most of the time, I am able to confirm if I'm correct, because when I try to interact with them, and honestly, like, it's such a benign interaction. I'm like, hey, can I offer you a Christian conservative voter guide? Like 99% of the time, the Democrats are so nasty for absolutely no reason, like none. They just yell at me. They're like, oh, I wouldn't. No, you can't. And if I was going to need a voter guide, it wouldn't be for you guys. I vote Democrat. I'm a Democrat. Don't talk to me. I even had one lady who was like, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You shouldn't be influencing people this close to the polls. Now, obviously, we were obeying all of the rules, but I mean, she was a Democrat, so she didn't know very much. All right, so we'll give her some grace there. But these people are just so nasty for no reason. None. There's no reason to be nasty, and they choose it anyway. And that's how they behave in person. That's not to mention how nasty these people are online. They're just so nasty. I couldn't imagine being that nasty to anyone in person or otherwise, telling someone, that they are in a toxic cult because of the person they choose to support for president or for any elected office. I couldn't imagine that just because I have a different political opinion than you. Yet somehow we're the ones in the cult. Okay, sure. Evidence proves otherwise. All right. But sure, Bob. Well, all right. Sure. We'll see how that works out for you guys. All right. So we've got a lot of moving parts here, sort of breaking news that was trickling out throughout the day, including new updates in the Fani Willis saga. I know she wants people to call her Fani. I don't think she's fancy enough for me to call her Fani. So I'm going to call her Fani Willis. We've got that and more coming up, and I'm going to bring in the panel to discuss that. We'll be right back. If you like this clip and you want to see the full episode, click here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, come on, you know you do. Click here.